The autumn rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the mountain path into a treacherous ribbon of mud. May clutched her small bundle of possessions tighter against her chest, her rain-soaked kosode clinging uncomfortably to her skin as she pushed forward through the downpour. Her straw sandals had disintegrated hours ago, leaving her to continue barefoot, each step a painful reminder of how far she had come and how much farther she might need to go. 3 days of flight had brought her deep into the mountains, well beyond the borders of Lord Hidaka's domain, where her face might be recognized. The forest grew denser here, the pines and cypress creating a canopy that offered minimal shelter from the storm. Exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but fear pushed her onward. Better to die of exposure in these mountains than face what awaited her back in the village. As twilight deepened into true darkness, May stumbled upon the abandoned hunter's cabin purely by chance, or perhaps by the mercy of whatever kami still watched over desperate women. It stood in a small clearing, half hidden by encroaching vegetation, its roof sagging but largely intact. In the dim light, she could make out gaps in the wooden walls and a door hanging crookedly from one remaining hinge, but it was shelter nonetheless. She approached cautiously, years of village tales about mountain spirits and yokai making her wary, despite her desperate circumstances. The cabin appeared to have been abandoned for several seasons. Judging by the vegetation growing through the rotted floorboards and the thick layer of dust covering the few remaining furnishings. A low table with one broken leg, a rusted iron pot, and the remnants of a sleeping pallet in the corner. May stepped inside, the relative dryness a blessed relief after days exposed to the elements. She set her bundle down and inspected her temporary sanctuary more carefully. Despite its dilapidated condition, the roof leaked in only a few places, and the walls, though weathered, blocked most of the wind. A small, sunken hearth in the center of the single room offered the possibility of fire if she could find dry wood and a way to light it. Against all odds, she discovered a small cache of reasonably dry firewood stacked beneath a shelf, along with primitive fire-starting tools. Whether left by the cabin's previous occupant or some passing traveler, it was a gift she accepted with whispered thanks to whatever spirits might be listening. After several failed attempts, her cold-stiffened fingers finally coaxed a small flame to life. As warmth gradually filled the tiny cabin, May unwrapped her meager possessions. A change of clothes now thoroughly dampened, a small knife, a wooden hair comb that had belonged to her mother, and a pouch containing a handful of copper coins, all she had managed to grab before fleeing. Most precious was a sealed letter wrapped in oiled paper to protect it from the rain, bearing the seal of a prominent merchant in the capital. Her last hope, if she could survive long enough to deliver it. She spread her wet kosode near the fire to dry and changed into her spare garments, which, while damp, were at least not completely soaked through. Then she settled beside the hearth, holding her hands toward the flames as she contemplated her situation. For the first time in 3 days, she allowed herself to truly rest, the immediate terror of pursuit giving way to a more measured assessment of her predicament. She had put considerable distance between herself and the village, traveling mostly by night and keeping to the forests rather than the roads. The autumn rains had likely obscured her tracks, and few would expect a village woman to flee alone into these mountains, known for their treacherous terrain and occasional bandits. But her reprieve was temporary. Her coins would last perhaps a week if she was careful. The cabin offered immediate shelter, but no sustainable source of food, and winter approached, its early breath already visible in the morning frost and the changing colors of the maple leaves. Still, she had escaped, and for now, that was enough. As exhaustion overtook fear, May curled up near the fire and fell into the first real sleep she had experienced since fleeing her village 3 nights earlier. She awoke to watery daylight filtering through the cabin's gaps and the patter of continuing rain on the roof. The fire had died to embers, but had provided enough warmth through the night that she no longer felt the bone-deep chill of the previous days. Rising stiffly, she rekindled the fire and took stock of her surroundings in proper light. The cabin was even more dilapidated than she had realized in the darkness, clearly abandoned for years rather than merely seasons. Yet it had once been someone's home, evidenced by crude shelving built into one wall and the remains of what might have been a small altar in the corner. Outside, through gaps in the wall planks, she could see that the clearing was actually the remnant of what had once been a small garden, now overrun with wild vegetation. Pragmatic assessment suggested the cabin could remain her sanctuary for perhaps a week, longer if she could find a way to supplement her meager provisions. The rain meant water was plentiful, at least if she could find a way to collect it. And the remote location, while challenging for survival, offered protection from those who might search for her. May had just begun to explore the area immediately around the cabin when a sound from the forest edge made her freeze. She ducked back inside, heart pounding, and peered through a gap in the wall. A deer emerged cautiously from the trees, moving slowly into the overgrown garden to browse on the abundant vegetation. Relief flooded through her, followed by thoughtful consideration. If wild animals visited regularly, perhaps there were edible plants she could harvest as well. Over the next 2 days, as the rain finally began to ease, May established a precarious routine. She ventured farther from the cabin each day, learning the surrounding forest and discovering unexpected resources: wild mushrooms growing on fallen logs, late autumn berries clinging to bushes, even a stream a short walk away with clear, cold water and occasional small fish she managed to catch with improvised tools and considerable patience. The cabin itself she gradually improved, plugging the worst of the leaks with moss and leaves, clearing debris from the floor and creating a more substantial sleeping pallet from pine boughs. She found herself talking aloud occasionally, explaining her actions to the empty air, as if the cabin itself were a companion in her solitude. "This should keep the rain out a bit better," she murmured, pressing moss into a particularly troublesome gap in the wall, "at least until winter comes in earnest." Winter. That was the shadow that loomed over her fragile peace. She might survive here for now, but the mountain winters were legendary in their harshness. Without proper provisions and much sturdier shelter, she would not see spring. The letter she carried offered a possible future in the capital, but the capital was many days' journey away, through terrain that would only grow more dangerous as winter approached. On the 5th day, as May returned to the cabin with her gathered provisions, a handful of mushrooms and some pine nuts she had laboriously extracted from foraged cones, the sound of footsteps on the path beyond the clearing brought her to a sudden halt. She dropped silently into a crouch behind a fallen log, her dark clothing blending with the shadows of the forest as she held her breath and listened. The footsteps were measured and deliberate, not the cautious steps of a wild animal or the furtive movements of a bandit. Someone approached who made no effort to conceal their presence. Either supremely confident or unaware, they were nearing an occupied dwelling. From her hiding place, May watched as a tall figure emerged into the clearing. Even at a distance, the 2 swords at his hip marked him unmistakably as samurai. He moved with the fluid grace of one trained from childhood in martial arts, his posture straight despite what appeared to be a journey pack slung across his shoulders. He paused at the edge of the clearing, surveying the cabin with obvious interest. Even beneath the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, May could see he was assessing the dwelling, noting the recently cleared area around the entrance, perhaps even the thin wisp of smoke that might still be rising from the hearth inside. For a long moment he remained motionless, as if listening to the forest around him. Then, with decision apparently reached, he approached the cabin directly. May remained frozen behind her log, mind racing. She could flee deeper into the forest, but her few possessions, including the vital letter, remained inside the cabin. Besides, if he was a skilled tracker, running might only confirm her presence and lead him straight to her new hiding place. The samurai reached the cabin door and paused once more. Then, to May's astonishment, he knelt down and placed something on the ground before the entrance, a small bundle wrapped in leaves. Rising, he spoke aloud, his voice carrying clearly across the small clearing. "I mean no harm to whoever shelters here. I've left fresh rabbit caught this morning. The mountains grow cold, and food brings strength." With that, he turned and walked away, not back down the path he had arrived on, but toward the stream May had discovered days earlier. Soon, the forest swallowed his tall figure, leaving only disturbed underbrush to mark his passage. May remained hidden for nearly an hour, suspecting a trick designed to lure her into the open, but as the light began to fade and the air grew chill, practicality overcame caution. Moving silently, she crept to the cabin entrance and examined the bundle the stranger had left. It was indeed a rabbit, already skinned and cleaned, wrapped neatly in broad leaves. Fresh meat, a luxury she had not tasted since fleeing the village. Her stomach clenched painfully at the sight, reminding her how inadequate her forage diet had been. She took the bundle inside and rekindled the fire in the hearth. As she prepared the unexpected gift, her mind turned over this puzzling development. The samurai had clearly known someone was staying in the cabin, had perhaps been watching her for longer than she realized. Yet, instead of confronting her or reporting her presence to authorities, he had offered food and then departed. As the rabbit cooked, filling the small cabin with a rich aroma that made her dizzy with hunger, May considered her options. She could abandon the cabin immediately, sacrificing the small comforts she had established, out of fear that the samurai might return with less benevolent intentions, or she could remain, accepting the risk that his knowledge of her presence posed. The rational choice was to flee, but the cooking meat, the warmth of the fire, and the shelter of the now familiar cabin walls made the thought of returning to the forest almost unbearable. Besides, if he had wished her harm, he had already had ample opportunity. She ate the rabbit slowly, savoring each bite of the rich meat, using her small knife to separate every morsel from the bones. Afterward, she felt stronger than she had in days, the protein providing sustenance her forage diet had lacked. That night, she slept with her knife beside her pallet, waking at every sound from the forest beyond the cabin walls. But dawn arrived without incident, and May began another day in her precarious sanctuary, more alert now to signs that she might not be as alone as she had believed. 2 more days passed without further evidence of the mysterious samurai. May continued her routine of gathering and improving the cabin, but now she moved with greater caution, always watching the forest edge for signs of observers. She began to wonder if perhaps the encounter had been a singular event, a passing traveler who had left a kindness and continued on his journey, never to cross her path again. On the morning of the 3rd day after the encounter, that hope was shattered by a firm knock at the cabin door. May froze, the handful of herbs she had been hanging to dry forgotten as she stared at the door. For a wild moment, she considered pretending the cabin was empty, but that was foolishness. The freshly tended fire and her possessions scattered around the room made her presence obvious to anyone who entered. The knock came again, neither demanding nor hesitant, simply announcing a presence that awaited acknowledgement. Drawing a deep breath to steady herself, May crossed to the door and pulled it open just enough to see who stood outside. It was indeed the samurai, though seeing him at close range, rather than from hiding, revealed details she had missed before. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, rather than the older warrior she had imagined from a distance. His face, now visible beneath the straw hat, showed a weathered complexity, handsome in a severe way, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but marked by a thin scar that traced from his left temple down to his jawline. His eyes, dark and intelligent, studied her with equal assessment. He bowed formally, though not as deeply as one would to a social superior. "Forgive my intrusion. I am Takeshi, once of the Abe clan. May I speak with you?" The formal introduction, delivered as if they met on a village street rather than at a dilapidated cabin in the wilderness, momentarily disarmed May. Courtesy had been trained into her since childhood, and she found herself responding automatically. "I am May." She hesitated, then added, "Once of Kawasemi village." No family name offered. She had none to give that she wished to claim anymore. "The rabbit was to your liking?" he asked, and there was something almost gentle in the inquiry, as if he genuinely cared whether his gift had been useful. "Yes. Thank you for your kindness to a stranger." May remained in the doorway, neither inviting him in nor stepping outside to continue the conversation on more neutral ground. Every instinct urged caution, despite his seemingly benign manner. "Not entirely a stranger," he replied. "I've been aware of your presence for several days. These mountains are my temporary home as well, and I make it my business to know who travels through them." The calm acknowledgement that he had been observing her sent a chill through May that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "And what business brings a samurai to these remote mountains?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Much the same as brings a village woman, I suspect," Takeshi replied, "the desire not to be found." The simple statement hung in the air between them, a recognition of shared circumstance that May had not expected. She studied him more carefully, noting now the worn quality of his clothing, fine material, but travelled in for many days without opportunity for proper care. The swords at his hip were well maintained, but their fittings were plain, without the ornate details that would mark a samurai in a lord's current favour. "A ronin, then," she said, using the term for a masterless samurai. A shadow crossed his features briefly. "For now," he agreed. "Circumstances change. Lords rise and fall. Those who serve them must adapt or perish." The philosophical tone seemed genuine rather than affected, suggesting experiences that had taught him such lessons firsthand. May found her wariness fractionally reduced, though not eliminated. "Why seek me out now after leaving the rabbit as an anonymous gift?" she asked. "Because the weather changes," he replied, gesturing toward the mountains visible beyond the clearing. "The first snow will reach these heights within 2 weeks. This cabin will not protect you when true winter arrives." The blunt assessment matched May's own calculations, though hearing it stated so matter-of-factly brought the reality of her situation into sharper focus. "I don't intend to remain that long," she said, the lie coming easily, despite her uncertainty about what alternatives truly existed. Takeshi's expression suggested he recognized the falsehood, but chose not to challenge it directly. "Then perhaps I can offer assistance for your onward journey, whatever its destination. I know these mountains well, including paths that remain passable even as winter approaches." The offer seemed generous, perhaps too much so from a stranger. "Why would you help me?" May asked directly. "You know nothing about me or my circumstances." "I know you're alone, far from villages or towns, with minimal provisions and inadequate shelter as winter approaches," he replied evenly. "I know you've demonstrated resourcefulness in surviving this long, and I know that whatever drove you to these mountains must have been severe indeed, for few would choose such hardship voluntarily." His assessment was accurate enough to be unsettling. May shifted her stance slightly, ensuring her small knife remained accessible in her OB, though she harbored no illusions about her chances against a trained warrior should his intentions prove hostile. "Perhaps I am fleeing justice for crimes committed," she suggested, testing his reaction. "Would you still offer assistance then?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Are you?" "No," she admitted after a moment. but you cannot know that with certainty." "True enough," he acknowledged. "Yet I trust my judgment of character, developed through years of observing people in both their finest and darkest moments. You do not strike me as someone fleeing deserved justice." The implicit suggestion that she might be fleeing undeserved justice was uncomfortably perceptive. May found herself at a crossroads. Continue maintaining distance from this unexpected intruder into her solitude, or accept the possibility that his assistance might mean the difference between survival and death as winter approached. "I have a small camp half a day's walk from here," Takeshi continued when she remained silent. "More substantial than this cabin, with provisions adequate for the coming months. I offer you shelter there while you determine your onward path, or at minimum, guidance to a safer location before snow makes travel impossible." It was a generous proposal, delivered without obvious expectation of reciprocation. Yet May had learned through bitter experience that apparent generosity often concealed ulterior motives, particularly from men who encountered women alone and vulnerable. "And what would you expect in return for this assistance?" she asked bluntly. If he was offended by the implication, Takeshi showed no sign. "Conversation, perhaps," he replied. "These mountains offer solitude, which I sought deliberately, but human connection remains a need not easily discarded. Beyond that, nothing you do not freely offer." The answer was neither what May had feared, nor entirely what she had expected. The acknowledgement of loneliness from a samurai, even a masterless one, seemed an unusual admission, suggesting either exceptional honesty or calculated manipulation. "I must consider your offer," she said finally. "It is unexpected and requires thought." Takeshi inclined his head in acceptance. "Of course, I will return tomorrow morning for your answer." He reached into his sleeve and withdrew a small wrapped package which he extended toward her. "In the meantime, dried venison and some late autumn berries I gathered yesterday. The mountains offer abundance to those who know where to look." May accepted the package with murmured thanks, her fingers briefly brushing his in the exchange. His hands, she noted, bore the calluses of both sword practice and practical labor, a samurai who did not consider himself above working with his hands when circumstances required. With another formal bow, Takeshi turned and departed, moving back toward the forest with the same fluid grace she had observed days earlier. May watched until he disappeared among the trees, then closed the cabin door and leaned against it, her mind whirling with this development and the decision it forced upon her. The venison proved excellent, smoked to perfection, and offering far more sustenance than her own foraging efforts had produced. As she ate, May considered her options with the pragmatic assessment that had kept her alive thus far. Accepting help from this unexpected source carried obvious risks. Despite his courteous manner and apparent genuineness, Takeshi remained a stranger with unknown motivations. As a ronin, he operated outside the strict codes that governed samurai in formal service, making his actions less predictable. And regardless of his personal honor, if he discovered her true identity and the reason for her flight, he might feel compelled by broader loyalties to return her to those she fled. Yet refusing his offer presented equally severe challenges. Her own assessment of the approaching winter matched his warning. The cabin would become a frozen tomb when heavy snows arrived. Her provisions dwindled despite foraging efforts, and game would only become scarcer as winter deepened. The letter she carried might offer sanctuary if she reached the capital, but the journey grew more dangerous with each day's delay. As darkness fell, May found herself having an imagined conversation with her grandmother, dead these 3 years, but still the wisest voice she knew. "He's samurai, Obasan," she murmured to the empty cabin. "Even masterless, he was born to a world of privilege I can never understand." In her mind, her grandmother's weathered face crinkled in that familiar expression of practical wisdom. Men are men before they are samurai or peasants or merchants, child. Look to his actions, not his station. His actions have been kind thus far, May acknowledged, but many begin with kindness only to reveal different intentions once trust is established. True enough, her imagined grandmother agreed. So accept help without offering blind trust. Take each day as it comes, remain watchful, and keep your knife close. It was, May realized, essentially the same approach that had guided her since fleeing the village. Cautious acceptance of necessary risks, tempered by constant vigilance and readiness to adapt as circumstances changed. By morning, decision crystallized. She would accept Takeshi's offer of better shelter, but maintain vigilance and independence, ready to flee again at the first sign that his assistance carried hidden costs she was unwilling to pay. The letter she carried, her ultimate insurance and hope for a different future, she secreted in a carefully sewn inner pocket of her kosode, where it would remain with her regardless of what else she might need to abandon. When Takeshi returned as promised, May was prepared, her few possessions bundled, and the cabin returned to roughly the state in which she had found it. Some irrational part of her felt she owed the small shelter that respect, having provided protection during her most vulnerable days of flight. If Takeshi was pleased by her decision, he showed it only in the slight relaxation of his formal posture as she stepped outside to join him. "The journey to my camp will take approximately half a day," he explained as they set out. "The path grows steep in places, but presents no significant dangers to one who has already traveled these mountains alone." The observation carried a hint of admiration that May found herself unexpectedly appreciative of, despite her continued wariness. Few in her experience had recognized the courage her flight had required, seeing only the desperation that drove it. They traveled in companionable silence for the first hour, Takeshi setting a pace that challenged but did not exhaust May's endurance. The forest path wound steadily upward, sometimes following game trails, and sometimes appearing to exist only in Takeshi's memory of previous passages. Occasionally he pointed out features of interest, plants with medicinal properties, signs of animal passage, or particularly defensible terrain, the latter suggesting a military mind that remained active despite his current solitude. As they paused beside a small stream to drink and rest briefly, May found herself curious about this unusual samurai who had interrupted her isolation. "You said you were once of the Abe clan," she ventured. "What service do you provide them now, so far from their domains?" Takeshi's expression remained neutral, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, a shadow of memory or emotion quickly controlled. "None, at present. My lord made choices I could not honorably support. Rather than face the conflict between obedience and conscience, I chose to remove myself from service." It was a carefully phrased explanation that revealed little of specific circumstances, while acknowledging a principled stand that must have cost him greatly. To abandon one's clan and lord, even for reasons of conscience, meant sacrificing not merely position, but identity and purpose, particularly for a samurai, whose entire existence traditionally centered on loyal service. That required considerable courage, May observed quietly. Or considerable cowardice, he countered. Some would say true courage would have been remaining to influence events from within, rather than preserving personal honor at the cost of abandoning those who might have benefited from my continued presence. The response revealed unexpected depth of reflection, suggesting this was no impulsive decision, but one Takeshi had examined from multiple perspectives. It also hinted at ongoing uncertainty about whether he had made the right choice, a vulnerability May would not have expected from one trained from birth to project absolute conviction. "And what brought you to these particular mountains?" she asked, moving to slightly less personal terrain. "They lie unclaimed between three provinces, governed more by nature than by lords with competing interests," Takeshi replied. "A suitable place for one who needs distance from political entanglements while determining his next path." He glanced at her with that same perceptive gaze. "Not unlike yourself, I suspect." The parallel was uncomfortably accurate. Though May's political entanglements were of a very different nature than those a samurai might face. Still, the recognition of similar need for sanctuary created an unexpected bridge between their vastly different experiences. They resumed walking, the path growing steeper as they climbed toward what Takeshi had described as a mountain plateau where his camp was established. The autumn forest around them blazed with color, maples in brilliant red, ginkgos in vibrant yellow, interspersed with the deep green of pines that would remain long after their deciduous companions had dropped their leaves. "It's beautiful," May murmured, almost to herself, as they rounded a bend that offered a sweeping view of the valley below, now wreathed in morning mist that the strengthening sun gradually burned away. "Beauty and danger often coexist in these mountains," Takeshi observed. "The same vista that stops your breath with its beauty will claim that breath permanently if you fail to respect the conditions it creates." It was, May realized, an apt description of much in life, perhaps even of the man walking beside her, whose aesthetic appreciation and philosophical bent existed alongside the lethal training evident in his every movement. By midday, the forest began to thin as they approached what appeared to be the edge of a clearing. Takeshi paused, turning to May with unexpected gravity. "Before we proceed, I should explain what you will find in my camp," he said. "I am not entirely alone in these mountains. There is another who shares my sanctuary, though for different reasons than my own." This revelation sent a spike of alarm through May. All her calculations about risk and survival had been based on the assumption of a single individual whose intentions she would need to assess and guard against. Multiple unknowns complicated matters significantly. "Who?" she asked, unable to keep the wariness from her voice. "His name is Ichiro," Takeshi replied, "a physician who found himself on the wrong side of a political dispute in the capital. His skills heal without regard for clan allegiance or political faction, which proved inconvenient to some powerful interests." A physician. May felt some of her tension ease, replaced by practical consideration of how such a person might actually improve her chances of survival through the coming winter. Medical knowledge was valuable in remote conditions where injuries or illness could prove fatal without proper treatment. "He poses no threat to you," Takeshi continued, apparently reading her concerns. "Like myself, he sought these mountains for sanctuary, while political turbulence settles elsewhere. Unlike myself, his hands are trained to save lives rather than take them." There was something in his tone when he made this distinction, not quite bitterness, but a wry acknowledgement of the fundamental difference between their trained purposes. It suggested a man who had made peace with his martial role, while perhaps questioning its ultimate value compared to more constructive contributions. "I understand," May said simply. "Thank you for warning me before our arrival." With a nod of acknowledgement, Takeshi led her the final distance to the edge of the clearing. What May saw as they emerged from the forest made her stop in momentary astonishment. Camp had suggested to her a temporary arrangement, perhaps a larger version of the crude shelter she had established in the abandoned cabin. Instead, they stood before what could only be described as a small but proper mountain outpost. A substantial structure of timber and stone formed the central building, its construction solid enough to withstand heavy snow loads, with a proper chimney from which a thin spiral of smoke now rose. Around it, clustered smaller outbuildings, what appeared to be a storage shed, a roofed woodpile already stacked high with split logs, and what might be a smokehouse for preserving meat. A small garden plot, now mostly harvested but with a few hardy vegetables still evident, occupied a sunny portion of the clearing. The whole arrangement spoke of careful planning and considerable labor invested over time, certainly more than the few weeks or months that might align with Takeshi's story of recent self-exile. Seeing her surprise, Takeshi offered explanation without being asked. This was once a watch post for the mountain passes, established during more turbulent times when provincial lords feared invasion through these routes. It was abandoned decades ago when more stable alliances formed, but the main structure was built to last. Ichiro and I have restored it to some functionality over the past months. It was a reasonable explanation, though it left May wondering how a Ronin and a physician had found themselves with the skills, tools, and motivation to undertake such substantial renovation. Before she could consider further, the door of the main building opened and a figure emerged to greet them. Ichiro, the physician, proved to be older than Takeshi by perhaps a decade, his hair already showing strands of grey, despite a face that remained relatively unlined. He was shorter and slighter of build, with the careful movements of someone accustomed to precision work rather than martial training. His clothing was simple, but of good quality, and his hands, May noticed immediately, were meticulously clean. A rarity in the mountains, but consistent with medical practice. "You've returned with a guest," he observed, his tone neutral but not unwelcoming as he inclined his head toward May in polite greeting. "An unexpected development." "Circumstances sometimes require adaptation of plans," Takeshi replied, matching the older man's formal cadence. May-san sheltered in the abandoned hunter's cabin in the lower valley. With winter approaching, I offered more substantial accommodation while she determines her onward path. Ichiro's gaze, sharp and assessing in a way that reminded May of the village doctor examining a patient for unspoken symptoms, moved from Takeshi to herself and back again. Whatever he observed in this silent assessment appeared to satisfy him as he nodded once before addressing May directly. "You are welcome here," he said simply. "We have space and provisions enough to share, and the mountain winters are no place for solitary survival without proper preparation." The straightforward welcome, without excessive questioning about her origins or purpose, eased some of May's tension. She bowed in formal acknowledgement, matching the degree of respect Ichiro had shown her, neither placing herself lower than warranted, nor presuming equality with men of status she did not share. "Thank you for your hospitality," she replied. "I hope not to impose for longer than necessary." "Necessity in these mountains is determined more by weather than by human preference," Ichiro observed with dry practicality. "Come inside." The wind grows sharper as afternoon advances. The interior of the structure proved as substantial as its exterior suggested. A central room served as both gathering space and kitchen, with the hearth providing both cooking facilities and warmth. Two smaller rooms opened off this main space, sleeping quarters, May presumed, though the arrangement suggested the outpost had originally been designed for more than just two inhabitants. A third door, partially ajar, revealed what appeared to be Ichiro's medical workspace, with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling and various implements arranged on a wooden table. "You may have the eastern chamber," Ichiro informed her, gesturing to a door on their right. "It's small, but weather-tight, with its own brazier for additional warmth when the main hearth's heat proves insufficient." May murmured appropriate thanks, noting that the arrangement would provide her with private space rather than requiring her to sleep in the communal area, a consideration that significantly eased her concerns about accepting this shelter. A door that could be secured from the inside would provide both actual and psychological safety as she assessed her host's true nature and intentions. The chamber, when she inspected it a few minutes later, proved more comfortable than anything she had experienced since fleeing the village. A proper sleeping platform, raised off the floor to protect against drafts and cold, occupied one wall. A small window, covered with oiled paper that admitted light while keeping out wind, overlooked the clearing. A chest for storage and a simple standing screen for privacy completed the furnishings. Basic, certainly, but luxurious compared to the abandoned cabin or the forest floor where she had spent her first nights of flight. Settling her few possessions in the chamber, May took a moment to center herself and assess her new situation. The outpost offered genuine shelter and apparent safety, with hosts who seemed neither hostile nor overtly suspicious of her presence. Yet questions remained about both men's true circumstances and purposes in these mountains, just as she had shared only the barest outline of her own. When she re-emerged into the main room, she found Takeshi arranging firewood in the hearth, while Ichiro prepared what appeared to be an evening meal. The domestic scene struck May as incongruous. A samurai and a court physician engaged in household tasks that would typically be relegated to servants or women in their normal social spheres. Yet both moved with the comfort of those who had adapted to necessity rather than clinging to hierarchies that served no purpose in their current circumstances. "You've arrived at a fortunate time," Ichiro remarked without looking up from the vegetables he was slicing. "We completed our winter preparations last week. The smokehouse is full, the root cellar stocked, and the woodpile adequate for even the harshest season." The statement carried subtle reassurance that her presence would not strain already limited resources, a practical concern May had considered in accepting Takeshi's offer of shelter. It also suggested that whatever had brought these two men to this remote location, they had committed to remaining through the winter rather than viewing it as merely temporary sanctuary. "I'm grateful for your willingness to share such carefully gathered provisions," May replied. "I can contribute through labor, if not through supplies of my own. I'm capable with cooking, sewing, and general household tasks." She hesitated, then added, "And I learn quickly if there are other skills needed that I haven't yet mastered." "An extra pair of hands is always welcome," Takeshi said, straightening from his arrangement of the firewood. "Particularly as snow will soon increase the labor required for basic tasks. Paths must be kept clear, structures maintained against snow load, and water sources preserved from freezing." The matter-of-fact assessment of her potential usefulness focused on practical contribution rather than gender-specific roles, gave May a momentary sense of being valued for her capabilities rather than merely accommodated out of charity or other motives. It was a novel experience after the village's rigid expectations of women's proper place and activities. The evening meal proved simple but hearty, a stew of root vegetables and preserved meat, accompanied by rice and pickled vegetables that must have been prepared weeks earlier in anticipation of winter provisions. The three ate in a silence that was neither uncomfortable nor particularly warm, the shared meal of people connected by circumstance rather than choice or deep familiarity. As they finished, Ichiro broke the silence with unexpected directness. "We have not asked your reasons for traveling alone in these mountains, May-san, nor your ultimate destination. That restraint is deliberate, not an oversight." May set down her empty bowl, considering her response carefully. "I appreciate such discretion," she said finally. "My circumstances are complicated. But I assure you I bring no intentional danger to your sanctuary. Intentional danger is rarely the most significant threat," Ichiro observed with the dry wisdom of one who had seen much of human nature. "Those fleeing difficult circumstances often trail consequences behind them, visible or not." Dudi, It was a gentle but clear acknowledgement that her presence might carry risks beyond her control or intention, a possibility May had considered extensively during her flight. Her disappearance would have been noted quickly, and while she hoped the direction of her flight had been sufficiently obscured, she couldn't guarantee pursuers wouldn't eventually trace her path to these mountains. "If my presence creates unacceptable risk, I will leave as soon as weather permits," she offered, though the thought of returning to the forest with winter approaching sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening's dropping temperature. "That's not what Ichiro suggests," Takeshi interjected, his tone level, but with an undertone of reproof directed at the older man. "We all carry histories that may attract unwanted attention. The point is to understand that each of us accepts certain risks in offering and receiving sanctuary here." Ichiro inclined his head in acknowledgement of the correction. "Indeed, I spoke not to suggest your departure, but to establish mutual understanding of our situation. Knowledge allows preparation. Preparation improves survival." The physician's pragmatic assessment aligned with May's own approach to her precarious circumstances. She nodded slowly. "Then you should know that there are those who may seek me. Though I've taken significant measures to obscure my trail, they are not." She hesitated, seeking the right words. Official authorities, though they may claim such standing in certain contexts. It was a carefully phrased warning that avoided specific details while conveying the essential nature of the threat. Not government officials or magistrates enforcing legitimate law, but men with power derived from other sources who believed they had rightful claim to her. Takeshi and Ichiro exchanged a glance that suggested this information confirmed rather than surprised them. "Few travel these mountains in late autumn without compelling reasons," Takeshi observed. "We assumed your journey was not undertaken lightly." "As for potential pursuers," Ichiro added, "this outpost was originally designed with defense in mind. Its location offers clear sightlines to all approaching paths, and the structure itself provides considerable security if properly maintained, which," he added with a hint of professional pride, "we have ensured it is." The reassurance that her presence didn't immediately condemn her new hosts to unacceptable danger eased one of May's primary concerns about accepting their shelter. While she had no desire to bring trouble to those who offered assistance, the reality of approaching winter left her few alternatives to accepting the risk that her past might eventually catch up with her and potentially endanger those around her. "Thank you for your understanding," she said simply, "and for offering shelter despite the uncertainties I bring with me." "The mountains teach that certainty is largely illusion," Takeshi replied. Rising to add wood to the fire as the evening deepened, "We prepare as best we can, remain vigilant, and adapt to circumstances as they develop. Little more is possible, regardless of how elaborately we might plan." It was, May reflected, a philosophy well suited to those who had left behind more structured lives to exist in this remote sanctuary. Perhaps also a necessary perspective for a samurai without a lord, a physician without a court position, and a woman fleeing an unwanted claim, all adrift from the social structures that would typically define their places and purposes. As the evening progressed, conversation turned to more practical matters, the outpost's daily routines, distribution of tasks, and immediate needs that May might assist with. By the time she retired to her small chamber, a basic framework for her integration into the outpost's operation had been established, providing both purpose and boundaries that made her presence less disruptive to the patterns Takeshi and Ichiro had already established. Alone in her room, with the door secured by a simple wooden bar, May allowed herself to truly relax for the first time since fleeing the village. The solid walls around her, the knowledge that watchful eyes would detect any approach to the outpost, and the unexpected acceptance she had found from her unusual hosts combined to create a sense of security she had not anticipated finding again so soon, if ever. Yet as she settled onto the sleeping platform, wrapping herself in the provided blankets against the mountain night's chill, May remained acutely aware that her sanctuary was both temporary and contingent. Winter would not last forever, and when spring made travel possible again, she would need to continue her journey to the capital, where the letter she carried might open doors to a different future. And if her past caught up with her before spring arrived, the fragile peace she had found here would shatter as suddenly as had her previous life in the village. For now, though, she had shelter, sustenance, and a measure of safety, more than she had dared hope for when she fled into the autumn night a week earlier, as sleep claimed her. May's last conscious thought was that survival sometimes depended on accepting help from unexpected sources, even when such acceptance carried risks of its own. The following days established a rhythm that gradually incorporated May into the outpost's operation. Takeshi maintained the exterior structures, hunted game that still remained before deep winter drove them to lower elevations, and monitored the surrounding forests for signs of approaching travelers or other potential threats. Ichiro tended his medicinal herbs, prepared treatments for common winter ailments, and maintained the interior spaces with the methodical precision that seemed characteristic of his nature. May found her place primarily in food preparation, mending, and assistance with preserving the last of the autumn's foraged materials. Her village upbringing had included practical skills that translated well to the outpost's needs, and she took satisfaction in contributing meaningfully rather than merely being accommodated out of charity. Initially, she maintained careful distance from both men, retreating to her chamber when daily tasks were complete and volunteering minimal personal information beyond what was necessary for practical coordination. Neither Takeshi nor Ichiro pressed for more, respecting the boundaries she established with a consideration that gradually eased her wariness, if not eliminating it entirely. A week after her arrival, the first significant snowfall transformed the mountain landscape. May woke to a world turned crystalline white, the familiar clearing and forest edge rendered mysterious and new beneath a blanket of snow that continued to fall in thick, lazy flakes. The beauty momentarily stole her breath as she stood at her small window, watching dawn illuminate the transformed terrain. The practical implications of the snowfall soon became apparent as the outpost's routines adjusted to winter conditions. Paths needed regular clearing, water sources required monitoring to prevent freezing, and additional firewood was consumed to maintain comfortable temperatures within the main structure. The increased labor drew the three inhabitants into closer cooperation, conversations becoming more frequent and gradually more personal as they worked together against the common challenges presented by mountain winter. 2 weeks into her stay, as they shared an evening meal after a particularly demanding day, clearing snow from the outpost structures, May found herself relaxing into conversation more freely than she had previously allowed. "The village where I grew up experienced snow, but nothing like these mountain accumulations," she remarked, as Takeshi reported nearly 3 feet of snowpack in the forest beyond their cleared areas. A few inches was cause for celebration among the children and concern among the adults, who worried about field preparations being delayed. "Where was your village?" Ichiro asked, the question presented as casual interest rather than interrogation. May hesitated only briefly. "Kawasemi Village, in Hidaka Province. Small, known primarily for its indigo dye production." She offered this limited information as a test of sorts, watching for reactions that might indicate either man had connections to or knowledge of the region that could prove problematic. Neither showed particular recognition beyond general familiarity with the province itself. Takeshi merely nodded. I passed through Hidaka some years ago, though I don't recall that specific village. The province has a reputation for fine textiles. Yes, May confirmed. My mother's family were dyers for 3 generations. She taught me the craft from childhood. Nay, it was the first personal detail about her family she had shared, and she found herself surprised by how easily it had emerged in conversation. Perhaps the increasingly comfortable familiarity of their shared routines had lowered defenses she hadn't realized were still so actively maintained. A valuable skill, Ichiro observed, and one that would provide reliable livelihood in most circumstances. There was a question implied, but not asked directly, why someone with such established trade connections would abandon them for uncertain flight. May chose not to address the unspoken query, instead turning the conversation toward her host's backgrounds. And you, Ichiro-san, where did you practice medicine before coming to these mountains? The physician's expression revealed mild surprise at her direct question, after weeks of careful avoidance of personal histories. After a moment's consideration, he responded with measured openness. I trained in Kyoto under a physician who served noble households, he said. Eventually I established my own practice, treating those of various stations who could afford skilled care. A shadow crossed his features. But medicine and politics inevitably intertwine when one's patients include those with power and enemies. Knowledge of certain conditions, treatments, or prognoses can become dangerous when multiple factions vie for advantage. It was a circumspect explanation that nonetheless conveyed the essence of his circumstance. A physician whose knowledge of powerful patients had placed him in political crosshairs, necessitating removal from the capital until whatever specific conflict had endangered him resolved itself. And you found your way here, May prompted, curious about the connection between the court physician and the Ronin samurai, whose background suggested few natural points of intersection. Through necessity and good fortune, Ichiro replied, glancing at Takeshi. Our paths crossed at a time when both of us required discreet distance from previous associations. Finding this abandoned outpost seemed auspicious, remote enough for security, substantial enough for survival. Takeshi, who had remained silent during this exchange, now added his own perspective. Unusual circumstances create unexpected alliances. Ichiro's medical knowledge and my martial training complement each other in ways neither of us anticipated when we first agreed to share this sanctuary. There was something in his tone that suggested their alliance had perhaps begun from mutual convenience rather than immediate trust or affinity, evolving over time into the comfortable partnership May now observed between them. It paralleled, in some respects, her own gradually developing comfort with both men, a reminder that trust often emerged through shared experience rather than being granted immediately. And your own training? May asked Takeshi, emboldened by Ichiro's willingness to share parts of his history. You mentioned the Abe clan, but not your role within it. Takeshi's expression remained composed, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, a shadow of memory or emotion quickly controlled. I served as Hatamoto to Lord Abe, a direct retainer with both military and administrative responsibilities. My family has held such position for 3 generations. It was a significant revelation. Hatamoto held elite status among samurai, with direct access to their lords and responsibilities that extended beyond mere martial service into governance and political affairs. For one in such position to abandon service, especially from a family with multi-generational connection to their lord, suggested conflict of unusual severity. That represents considerable sacrifice, May observed quietly. The statement offered without expectation of further explanation. All choices involve sacrifice, Takeshi replied, his tone philosophical rather than bitter. The question is whether what is preserved holds greater value than what is lost. The conversation lapsed into thoughtful silence as each reflected on choices made and sacrifices accepted that had brought them to this shared sanctuary. May found herself wondering what Takeshi had considered worth preserving at the cost of position, identity, and generational loyalty. What principle or conviction had outweighed such substantial losses? Yet she asked no further questions, respecting his right to privacy just as he had respected hers. As weeks passed and winter settled fully upon the mountains, the initial wariness that had characterized their interactions gradually gave way to more genuine comfort and even moments of warmth. Daily routines created natural opportunities for conversation, and shared meals evolved from functional necessity to occasions for more relaxed exchange. While all three maintained certain boundaries around their most private histories and concerns, the immediate circumstances of their lives together became increasingly open and cooperative. May found herself drawn particularly to Takeshi's company during the long winter evenings. Unlike Ichiro, who often retired early to his medical texts or correspondence he maintained through infrequent messengers, Takeshi remained by the hearth, sometimes practicing calligraphy, sometimes merely sitting in meditation-like stillness. His quiet presence created space for conversation that developed naturally rather than feeling forced or intrusive. During one such evening, as wind howled around the outpost and fresh snow accumulated against the walls, May found herself sharing more of her background than she had previously intended. "My father died when I was 12. She said, responding to Takeshi's casual inquiry about her family's dye business. A fever that swept through the village in early spring. My mother continued the workshop with help from my older brother, but she never fully recovered from the loss. She followed him to the next world 3 years later." "I'm sorry," Takeshi said simply. Loss of parents at such age leaves wounds that heal slowly, if at all. Something in his tone suggested personal understanding rather than merely conventional sympathy. May glanced at him questioningly, and after a moment's hesitation, he offered his own experience in return. "My mother died birthing a younger brother who did not survive," he said quietly. "I was 9. My father lived another 15 years, but was never the same after her passing. He fulfilled his duties to our lord and clan, but joy had departed with her." It was a vulnerability rarely displayed by samurai, who were trained from childhood to control emotion and maintain composure regardless of personal circumstance. The shared confidence created unexpected connection between them, recognition of similar formative experiences despite their vastly different social positions. "After my mother's death, the dye workshop passed to my brother and his wife," May continued, finding herself wanting to reciprocate his openness. "I remained to assist with the business, but my sister-in-law preferred managing household matters herself." She hesitated, then added, "Relations between us were strained." "Family tensions often increase when roles shift unexpectedly," Takeshi observed. "My father's second wife, taken primarily to secure continuation of our family line, found similar difficulty integrating into a household already shaped by loss." The parallel understanding encouraged May to continue. "When opportunity arose for me to serve in the household of a merchant who traded our village's textiles to other provinces, it seemed best for all concerned. I had skills valuable to his operation, and my absence eased tensions within my brother's home." This portion of her history approached dangerous territory, the circumstances that had eventually led to her flight, but she found herself unwilling to stop the narrative completely, though she edited carefully to avoid the most revealing details. "The arrangement proved satisfactory for several years," she said, "but eventually the merchant's business interests evolved in directions that conflicted with my own welfare. When it became clear my position had become untenable, I chose to leave rather than accept what was being arranged for me. It was a significant understatement of the actual events, but conveyed the essential truth. She had fled rather than submit to arrangements made by others that threatened her autonomy and safety. Takeshi studied her thoughtfully, clearly recognizing the careful boundaries she had placed around the most sensitive aspects of her story. Choosing one's own path often requires courage greater than that demanded on any battlefield, he said finally, especially when convention and authority align against such choice. The validation of her decision, offered without judgment or demands for greater detail, touched May unexpectedly deeply. She had spent so many days questioning her own actions, wondering if flight had been cowardice rather than courage, if she should have found some way to accept circumstances she could not change, rather than risking everything to reject them. Some would call it selfish, she said quietly, placing personal preference above arranged obligations. There exists a difference between honoring legitimate obligation and submitting to exploitation, Takeshi replied, his tone carrying conviction without becoming sermon-like. The challenge lies in discerning where that boundary falls in each circumstance we face. It was, May realized, a philosophy that might well have guided his own decision to abandon service to Lord Abe. Recognition that certain lines existed beyond which obedience became complicity in actions one's conscience could not support. The parallel between their seemingly disparate situations created unexpected common ground that transcended the vast differences in their social positions and experiences. Before she could respond, the outpost door opened with a gust of cold air and swirling snowflakes, admitting Ichiro, returning from what he had described as a brief errand to check certain medicinal plants he maintained in a sheltered location near the structure. His entrance naturally shifted their conversation to more immediate concerns. But the connection established in that moment of shared vulnerability remained, subtly altering the dynamic between them in ways that would continue to develop as winter deepened. By midwinter, the outpost had settled into patterns that accommodated all three inhabitants with remarkable harmony, given their disparate backgrounds and the forced proximity created by harsh weather. May found herself genuinely comfortable for perhaps the first time since fleeing the village, her initial wariness giving way to cautious trust built on shared experience and mutual respect. This developing comfort allowed her to contribute more actively to the outpost's operation, moving beyond basic household tasks to sharing skills from her background in textile production. She demonstrated techniques for repairing worn clothing more durably than either man had managed previously, crafted additional blankets from stores of wool they had accumulated, and even experimented with natural dyes derived from materials Ichiro had gathered for medicinal purposes. In turn, both men shared knowledge from their respective training that May would never have accessed in her village life. Ichiro taught basic principles of wound treatment and herbal remedies for common ailments, pragmatically noting that such knowledge served everyone's interests in their isolated circumstance. Takeshi, somewhat to her surprise, offered instruction in simple defensive techniques suitable for someone of her stature and strength, explaining that mountain survival sometimes required protection from threats beyond weather and scarcity. These exchanges created bonds of reciprocity that transcended mere cohabitation, establishing a community of sorts among the three unlikely companions. Yet beneath this developing harmony, certain tensions and unresolved questions remained, primarily concerning what would happen when winter released its grip on the mountains and travel again became possible. May had shared nothing of her intended journey to the capital or the letter she carried that might secure her position there. Similarly, neither Takeshi nor Ichiro had spoken of plans beyond their current sanctuary. though occasional comments suggested neither viewed the outpost as permanent settlement. These undefined futures hovered at the edges of their interactions, acknowledged but not directly addressed, as Winter made such considerations temporarily theoretical rather than immediately pressing. The fragile equilibrium they had established was shattered, however, on a clear, bitter day in deep winter, when Takeshi returned from hunting with news that transformed their sanctuary into potential battleground. "Travelers approach from the southern pass," he announced without preamble, entering the main room where Mei and Ichiro were preparing preserved vegetables for the evening meal. 6 men, well armed, moving with purpose rather than merely seeking shelter from weather. Ichiro set down the knife he had been using, his expression betraying no alarm, but his posture shifting subtly to alertness. "Bandits, do you think, or something more specific?" "Not bandits," Takeshi replied with certainty. "Their movement is too disciplined, their equipment too uniform. They travel in formation maintained even through difficult terrain, men with training, following orders." Mei felt cold fear settle in her stomach, replacing the comfortable warmth of the hearth-heated room. "How far?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 2 hours, perhaps less, given their pace, Takeshi estimated. "I observed from the ridge overlook. They follow the main approach path, making no attempt at concealment. Mbai, which suggests either confidence or lack of concern about who might observe their arrival," Ichiro noted thoughtfully. "Neither bodes particularly well for our current circumstance." The assessment was accurate, but understated. Armed men approaching their isolated outpost with such purposeful advance likely sought something or someone specific. The most immediate question was which of the 3 fugitives had attracted this unwelcome attention. Takeshi turned to Mei, his expression grave, but not accusatory. "You mentioned potential pursuers when you first arrived. Could these men be connected to your situation?" It was a fair question, particularly given the immediate risk to all 3 of them. He considered briefly before answering with the honesty their shared circumstance demanded. "It's possible," she acknowledged, "though I took significant measures to obscure my trail, and the snowfall since my arrival should have eliminated any physical traces of my passage. If they seek me specifically, someone must have provided information about my general direction of travel. The possibility that someone in the village or along her escape route had betrayed her whereabouts, whether through intimidation or reward, had always existed as theoretical threat. Now it appeared that fear might have manifested as reality. Or they seek one of us, Ichiro pointed out reasonably. Both Takeshi and I left behind circumstances that might eventually prompt pursuit, given sufficient motivation or change in political winds. This alternative warranted consideration. Mei knew little of the specific situations that had driven either man to seek sanctuary in these mountains, but both had acknowledged leaving behind powerful interests who might have reason to locate them. "Regardless of their target, we must prepare for their arrival," Takeshi said. "Practical focus, replacing speculation." The outpost was designed with defense in mind, and winter conditions favor those already established with supplies and shelter. We hold significant advantages if confrontation proves unavoidable. "And if they merely seek temporary shelter from winter travel," Ichiro suggested, though his tone indicated he considered this unlikely. 6 additional people would strain our provisions, but not beyond possibility if their stay remained brief. "We prepare for worst possibilities while remaining open to better ones," Takeshi replied. It was, Mei had noticed, a philosophy that seemed to guide much of his approach to life, pragmatic preparation for difficulty combined with willingness to accept more favorable outcomes if they emerged. The next hour passed in focused preparation. Takeshi checked the outpost's defensive features, positioning supplies and equipment for maximum effectiveness if resistance became necessary. Ichiro gathered medical materials that might be needed for either hospitality or treatment of potential injuries. Mei secured their food stores and gathered essential possessions, preparing for either welcome or confrontation as circumstances might demand. As these practical measures progressed, Mei found herself drawn repeatedly to the window that overlooked the southern approach path, watching for first signs of the approaching party. Guilt coiled uncomfortably in her stomach at the thought that her presence might have brought danger to those who had offered shelter when she most needed it, combined with fear of what awaited if these were indeed the men she had fled. When Takeshi joined her at the window, his quiet presence beside her offered comfort without false reassurance. "We will address whatever arrives," he said simply, "and make decisions based on actual circumstances rather than fears projected ahead of reality." Mei nodded, appreciating both the steadiness of his manner and the implicit message that they would face whatever approached together rather than casting her out to meet potential pursuers alone. It was significant given the risk her presence potentially created for both men, a demonstration of solidarity she had not necessarily expected when she first accepted their offer of sanctuary. "If they are connected to my situation," she said quietly, "I won't allow your sanctuary to be compromised for my sake. My choices led me here. The consequences should remain mine to bear." Takeshi's expression remained composed, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, perhaps respect for her willingness to accept responsibility, or perhaps concern at what accepting such responsibility might ultimately require of her. "Choices and consequences often extend beyond our intentions," he observed. "Just as your arrival here created unexpected community among 3 solitary travelers, so too might these approaching men catalyze developments none of us anticipate." The philosophical perspective might have seemed abstract in another context, but Mei found it oddly grounding amid the uncertainty of their situation. It suggested viewing what approached not merely as threat to be feared or confronted, but as development to be observed and responded to with as much wisdom as circumstances allowed. Before she could reply, movement at the forest edge caught her attention. The approaching party had emerged from the tree line and now crossed the open area that separated the outpost from the forest proper. Even at distance, their disciplined formation and purposeful advance confirmed Takeshi's earlier assessment. These were trained men following specific orders, not random travelers seeking shelter. "They've arrived," she said simply, unnecessary statement serving to center her own thoughts as much as inform Takeshi, who had already spotted them. "Indeed," he acknowledged. "Now we discover their purpose." As the men approached the outpost's main entrance, details became clearer. They wore winter traveling clothes of good quality, though not ostentatious. Each carried a sword, and several had bows slung across their backs. Their formation suggested military training, with the apparent leader slightly ahead, and the others positioned to provide maximum coverage of potential threat angles, professional security rather than mere hired muscle. When they reached the cleared area immediately before the entrance, the leader raised his hand in formal request for acknowledgement rather than immediately demanding entrance or presenting explicit threat. It was, Mei noted with mixture of relief and continued wariness, a more respectful approach than she might have expected if these were indeed the men she feared. Takeshi moved to the entrance, motioning for Mei to position herself where she could observe without being immediately visible from outside. Ichiro took up position nearby, his medical supplies arranged for quick access if needed, but his manner suggesting readiness to assist with negotiation rather than treatment. With deliberate movements that conveyed neither aggression nor submission, Takeshi opened the door, just enough to address the visitors while maintaining defensive advantage. "You travel far from established routes," he observed, his tone neutral but carrying the natural authority of his samurai training. "What brings you to these mountains in winter?" The leader of the approaching party, a man perhaps 40 years of age with the weathered features of one accustomed to outdoor conditions, bowed with formal correctness, neither obsequious nor merely perfunctory. "I am Kojima Hiroto, chief retainer to Lord Matsuda of Tsuwano Province," he introduced himself. "We seek a physician named Ichiro, formerly of the imperial capital, believed to be sheltering in these mountains. Our purpose is not hostile, but concerns urgent medical need." The introduction and stated purpose caught May by surprise. Not pursuers seeking her return to unwanted claims, but men seeking Ichiro's medical expertise. Relief flooded through her, quickly tempered by awareness that this development might present different but equally significant challenges to their mountain sanctuary. Beside her, Ichiro had straightened at the mention of his name, his expression revealing complex emotions, quickly controlled. Recognition, wariness, and what might have been resignation flickered across his features before settling into composed assessment. "I know of Lord Matsuda," he said quietly to Takeshi, pitching his voice for their ears only. "A provincial lord of moderate influence, known for scholarly interests rather than military ambition. I treated his brother for a chronic condition several years ago before my departure from the capital." The information provided context that shaped potential response to the unexpected visitors. A legitimate lord seeking medical assistance presented different considerations than bandits, officials, or mercenaries pursuing fugitives. Yet the question remained why such a lord would send retainers into remote mountains seeking a physician who had deliberately removed himself from public practice. Takeshi, weighing these factors with the rapid assessment that characterized his decision-making, addressed the waiting retainer with measured response. "Your journey has not been wasted. The physician you seek is indeed here, though whether he chooses to respond to your request remains his decision to make." It was a carefully balanced answer, acknowledging Ichiro's presence without immediately committing to his cooperation, maintaining negotiating position while avoiding outright rejection that might escalate tension. May found herself admiring the diplomatic skill behind the seemingly straightforward statement. Kojima bowed again, this time with evident relief. "We would be grateful for opportunity to present our Lord's request directly. The weather grows harsh, and our journey has been long." The implicit request for shelter created immediate practical dilemma. 6 additional people would strain the outpost's resources, particularly if their stay extended beyond a day or two. Yet refusing shelter during winter conditions would violate basic mountain hospitality, potentially creating conflict where none initially existed. Before Takeshi could respond, Ichiro stepped forward, apparently having reached his own decision during this exchange. "I will hear Lord Matsuda's request," he said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of his court physician training. "And you and your men may shelter here while we discuss the matter, provided weapons remain secured and behavior reflects guests rather than enforcers." It was a conditional welcome that established clear boundaries while offering necessary hospitality, a balanced approach that mirrored Takeshi's own, but extended it to specific commitment. May, observing this interaction, noted the subtle shift in dynamic between the two men, with Ichiro taking lead in a situation that directly concerned his expertise and background. Kojima accepted these terms with another formal bow, more deeply respectful than his previous acknowledgments. "On my honor as Lord Matsuda's retainer, we seek only medical assistance, not confrontation. We will abide by any reasonable conditions for the duration of our shelter here." With this agreement established, Practicalities quickly took precedence over continued negotiation. The 6 visitors were permitted entry, their weapons respectfully but firmly secured in a location that ensured they remained accessible enough to avoid insult but not immediately available for potential conflict. May, maintaining her position of relative obscurity, assisted with preparing hot tea and simple food for the travelers. Basic hospitality that nonetheless required careful management of their limited winter stores. As these arrangements proceeded, she observed the visitors with careful attention, seeking any sign that their stated purpose might conceal other motives. Nothing in their manner or conversation suggested deception, however. They displayed the expected exhaustion of men who had traveled difficult terrain in winter conditions, combined with evident relief at finding both shelter and the physician they had been sent to locate. Kojima himself, once basic needs had been addressed, requested private audience with Ichiro to explain his lord's medical requirements in appropriate detail. Takeshi arranged for this conversation to take place in Ichiro's treatment room, positioned in such way that he could monitor the interaction without obviously intruding on medical confidentiality. May found herself momentarily at loose ends, her assistance with immediate hospitality complete, but her role in this developing situation undefined. She moved to the hearth to ensure the fire remained adequate for the outpost's now expanded population, using the central position to continue observing the visitors while appearing occupied with routine tasks. One of the retainers, younger than most of his companions and apparently of slightly higher rank based on subtle differences in his attire and how the others deferred to him, approached where she worked. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, bowing with formal politeness. "I am Matsuda Noboru, nephew to Lord Matsuda, and assigned to lead this expedition to locate the physician." The introduction startled May, who had assumed all 6 were retainers rather than including family member of the Lord himself. This suggested even greater importance to their mission than initially apparent. A nephew would not be sent on arduous winter journey merely for routine medical consultation. "You're welcome to what simple comforts our outpost can provide," she replied, matching his formal tone while avoiding offering her own name in return. A minor discourtesy, perhaps, but one that maintained some privacy in uncertain circumstances. If Noboru noticed the omission, he gave no sign of it. "The physician, Ichiro-sensei, he has lived in these mountains for some time?" he asked, the question presented as casual conversation rather than interrogation. "Some months," May answered, offering truth without specific detail. "The outpost provides adequate shelter for those who understand mountain survival." Noboru nodded thoughtfully. "And you and the samurai, you are his assistants, students of medicine perhaps?" The question probed more directly toward their unusual living arrangement, seeking context for the unexpected community they had discovered. May considered her response carefully, aware that her answer might shape how the visitors perceived their situation and potential vulnerabilities. "We each bring different skills to our shared circumstance," she said finally. "Winter in these mountains requires cooperation regardless of background or training." It was a diplomatic deflection that neither confirmed nor denied specific relationships among the 3 of them, while emphasizing the practical nature of their association. Noboru seemed about to press further when Kojima and Ichiro emerged from their private consultation, drawing attention back to the primary purpose of the visitors' arrival. Ichiro's expression revealed little of what had been discussed, maintaining the composed neutrality that characterized his professional demeanor. He surveyed the gathered group briefly before addressing them collectively. "Lord Matsuda's medical situation has been explained to me," he stated. "It presents legitimate need that falls within my area of expertise." He paused briefly, glancing at Takeshi before continuing. "However, addressing it properly would require my presence at his residence for a period of weeks, perhaps longer, given the chronic nature of the condition and treatments required. This revelation shifted the situation significantly. What might have been resolved through preparation of medicines to be delivered by the retainers now appeared to require Ichiro's extended absence from the outpost, a development with implications for all three current inhabitants. Takeshi, who had positioned himself where he could observe both visitors and his companions, spoke with characteristic directness. "You consider accepting this request?" There was no judgment in the question, merely practical assessment of Ichiro's apparent inclination. The physician nodded once, his decision apparently reached during the private consultation. The condition described requires ongoing treatment and monitoring that cannot be adequately provided through prepared medicines alone, he explained. And, he hesitated briefly, there are aspects of the situation that align with my own interests in ways I had not anticipated finding in these remote mountains. This latter statement carried implications beyond mere medical necessity, suggesting the request somehow connected with circumstances that had initially driven Ichiro to seek sanctuary away from the capital. May, observing the subtle shift in his demeanor as he made this acknowledgement, sensed resolution of some internal conflict rather than creation of new tension, as if the unexpected arrival of Matsuda's retainers had presented opportunity to address matters he had been forced to abandon in his flight. "When would your departure be required?" Takeshi asked, maintaining focus on immediate practicalities rather than deeper implications. "As soon as weather permits safe travel," Kojima replied before Ichiro could answer. Lord Matsuda's condition, while not immediately life-threatening, causes significant suffering that we were instructed to help alleviate as expeditiously as possible. Takeshi nodded, accepting this timeline without argument. Then preparations should begin immediately, though actual departure may need to await improvement in current conditions. He glanced toward the window, where heavy snow had resumed falling, adding to already substantial accumulation on the ground. The mountains demand respect, regardless of urgency in human affairs. Once this pragmatic assessment was met with murmurs of agreement from the retainers, who had experienced the challenging winter conditions firsthand during their journey to the outpost. Even Kojima, clearly motivated to return with the physician as quickly as possible, acknowledged the wisdom of not attempting mountain travel during active snowfall. As discussion turned to practical arrangements for accommodating the visitors until departure became feasible, May found herself contemplating the implications of this unexpected development for her own situation. Ichiro's departure would alter the dynamic at the outpost significantly, leaving her and Takeshi as its only inhabitants, a more intimate arrangement that carried both practical challenges and potential for evolving personal connection that both attracted and concerned her. More immediately, the visitor's presence created complication regarding how much of her own circumstances to reveal or conceal. Thus far, she had maintained relative anonymity, with neither her full name nor specific background disclosed to the retainers. This caution seemed prudent, given her continued uncertainty about who might be seeking her, yet extended deception might create its own complications if the visitors remained for more than a day or two. These considerations occupied her thoughts as she assisted with rearranging the outpost's interior to accommodate the additional inhabitants. The main room would serve as sleeping space for most of the retainers, with Kojima and Noboru given more private accommodation in what had been Ichiro's treatment room. The physician himself would relocate to the main room to monitor patients who had developed minor frostbite during their journey. Night had fallen by the time these arrangements were completed. The continuing snowfall, isolating the outpost in a cocoon of white that muffled sound and obscured visibility beyond a few feet from the windows. The expanded group shared a simple but adequate meal, conversation remaining focused on practicalities of mountain survival and general conditions in surrounding provinces, rather than delving into personal histories or specific circumstances that had brought each of them to their current situation. When May finally retired to her small chamber, she found Takeshi waiting in the narrow corridor outside, his expression suggesting he wished to speak privately before she secluded herself for the night. She paused, raising a questioning eyebrow. "Our circumstance changes with unexpected speed," he observed quietly. "I thought we might benefit from shared assessment of these developments and their implications." The consideration implicit in this approach, consulting her perspective rather than simply informing her of decisions made, reflected the relationship of mutual respect that had developed between them over the winter months. May nodded, appreciating both the substance of his concern and the manner in which it was expressed. "Perhaps the garden shed," she suggested. "It offers privacy without requiring explanation of prolonged conversation in my chamber." Takeshi inclined his head in agreement, and they made their way outside through a side entrance, minimizing attention from the visitors gathered in the main room. The garden shed, used primarily for storage of tools and supplies, offered enclosed space free from snow and wind while remaining separate from the main structure, ideal for conversation that required privacy without potentially compromising propriety. Once inside, with the door secured against both weather and potential interruption, Takeshi came directly to the point. "Ichiro's departure alters our situation significantly. I wish to ensure you feel secure with the arrangement that would result, and to address any concerns you might have about either the visitor's presence or their eventual departure with him." The direct acknowledgement of how these changes might affect her position touched May unexpectedly. Throughout her life, decisions affecting her circumstances had typically been made by others, with little consideration for her comfort or preferences. Takeshi's explicit consultation regarding matters that would impact her daily existence represented respect she had rarely experienced, particularly from a man of his social standing. "I have no specific concerns about Ichiro's absence," she replied after considering her response carefully. "Our daily routines would require adjustment, but nothing insurmountable." She hesitated, then added more personally, "I've found your company comfortable. That wouldn't change without Ichiro's presence." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement either had made of the gradually developing connection between them, one that transcended mere practical cooperation to include genuine appreciation for each other's company and character. Takeshi's expression revealed momentary surprise at her frankness, followed by what appeared to be quiet satisfaction. "I've found similar comfort in your presence," he acknowledged. "But practical considerations extend beyond personal preference. The visitor's awareness of your presence here creates potential complications regarding your privacy and safety, depending on how long they remain before weather permits their departure." This concern aligned with May's own earlier thoughts. "Thus far, I've offered minimal information about myself," she noted, "but extended proximity makes continued vagueness increasingly awkward and potentially suspicious." "Precisely," Takeshi agreed. "And while these men appear focused solely on securing Ichiro's medical assistance, they return to a lord's household where information flows freely. If your pursuers have connections in that region, word of a woman matching your description might eventually reach them." The possibility, while not immediate threat, represented legitimate concern that required consideration. May appreciated Takeshi's attention to potential future complications rather than merely immediate circumstances, another example of the careful foresight that characterized his approach to their shared situation. "What would you suggest?" she asked, valuing his strategic assessment. "A simple but consistent account that explains your presence without revealing identifying details," he proposed. "Perhaps that you are a distant relation of mine, recently widowed, who sought family connection during period of grief. It explains both your presence here and certain emotional reserve that might otherwise prompt curiosity." The suggested narrative was thoughtfully constructed, providing plausible explanation for her situation while discouraging deeper inquiry that social sensitivity toward recent widowhood would naturally inhibit. It also established implied protection through family connection to a samurai, however currently masterless, which offered additional security against potential unwanted interest. "That seems reasonable," May agreed, "though it requires presenting ourselves as family rather than merely companions in sanctuary. Distant relation allows considerable flexibility in expected familiarity," Takeshi pointed out, pragmatically, "and provides foundation for continued association that raises fewer questions than our actual circumstances might generate." There was something in his tone when he referenced their continued association that suggested consideration extending beyond immediate practical concerns to longer-term possibilities neither had explicitly addressed in previous conversations. May found herself both intrigued and slightly unsettled by this implication, though not in ways that generated alarm or rejection. "Very well," she said, accepting the proposed approach. "I'll follow your lead regarding details if questions arise from our visitors." With this agreement reached, practical matters dominated the remainder of their conversation. Adjustments to daily routines that would be required by both Ichiro's departure and the temporary presence of 6 additional inhabitants in the outpost. By the time they returned to the main structure, moving separately to avoid appearance of secretive consultation, May felt more settled regarding the unexpected developments that had disrupted their winter sanctuary. The following days established new patterns as the outpost adjusted to its expanded population. The continuing snowfall delayed potential departure, requiring all inhabitants to accommodate extended cohabitation despite limited space and resources. May maintained the careful balance Takeshi had suggested, providing basic information that satisfied casual inquiry without inviting deeper investigation of her background or circumstances. To her relief, the visitors showed limited interest in her presence once the initial curiosity about the outpost's unusual inhabitants had been satisfied. Their focus remained primarily on Ichiro, whose expertise they had been specifically dispatched to secure, and on Takeshi, whose samurai status naturally commanded certain respect despite his current masterless condition. May's presumed position as widowed relation placed her in social category that required basic courtesy, but minimal engagement, a convenient invisibility she had learned to cultivate long before her flight from the village. Noboru, the lord's nephew, proved exception to this general disinterest. During the extended confinement created by continuing winter storms, he sought conversation with May more frequently than his companions, displaying curiosity about life in the mountains and the skills required for survival in such conditions. His manner remained respectful rather than presumptuous. His questions focused on practical matters rather than personal history, yet his attention remained more consistent than May found entirely comfortable given her desire to maintain low profile. On the 4th day of the visitor's stay, as May worked at preserving the last of certain medicinal herbs under Ichiro's direction before his departure, Noboru approached with the now familiar combination of formal courtesy and genuine interest that characterized his interactions. "Your knowledge of plant preparation appears substantial," he observed, watching as she carefully separated dried leaves from stems with practiced precision. Was such skill part of your previous household responsibilities, or acquired during your time in these mountains? The question probed, perhaps unintentionally, toward aspects of her background she preferred to keep vague. May continued her work without looking up, considering her response carefully before replying. Some knowledge came from my mother, who maintained our household garden, she said, offering partial truth that aligned with their established narrative without revealing her actual background in textile dyeing, which might prove too specific for comfortable anonymity. Ichiro-san has expanded that foundation considerably during our time here. Noboru nodded thoughtfully. Practical knowledge serves regardless of circumstance, he noted. My own mother insisted I learn basic cooking and sewing, despite my father's objection that such skills were unnecessary for one born to samurai household. Her wisdom became apparent during my first military campaign, when those abilities proved valuable amid field conditions. And it was a surprising admission from one of his status, acknowledging not only possession of skills typically relegated to women's domain, but appreciation for their practical value in traditionally masculine contexts. May found herself reassessing her initial wariness of his attention, recognizing genuine thoughtfulness that transcended conventional social expectations. Necessity often reveals wisdom in unexpected teachings, she agreed, allowing a small smile to accompany the philosophical observation. Indeed. Noboru hesitated, then continued with more personal inflection. May I ask what circumstances brought you to these mountains? Takeshi-san mentioned your widowhood, but not what followed that led to seeking sanctuary in such remote location. The direct question, while not unexpected given his continued interest, required careful navigation. May completed her current task before responding, using the brief pause to compose an answer that would satisfy curiosity without inviting deeper inquiry. Grief sometimes requires distance from familiar surroundings, she said simply, and circumstances in my husband's household proved increasingly uncomfortable after his passing. When opportunity arose to join distant family in more remote setting, it seemed appropriate choice for all concerned. It was plausible explanation that incorporated enough emotional truth, her genuine need to escape increasingly untenable situation, to carry conviction while maintaining the fictional framework they had established. Noboru's expression suggested he accepted this account without suspicion, his nod conveying understanding rather than continued curiosity. My mother experienced similar need for distance following my younger brother's death, he offered. Surprising May with reciprocal personal confidence, she retreated to Mountain Temple for nearly a year, returning only when her spirit had found sufficient healing to face familiar surroundings again. This unexpected sharing of personal experience created momentary connection that transcended their different circumstances and stations. May acknowledged it with respectful inclination of her head, recognizing the confidence offered without presuming excessive familiarity in return. Mountains provide perspective often difficult to maintain amid daily concerns of village or town, she observed, shifting toward more general philosophical ground rather than continuing personal exchange that might lead to territories she preferred to avoid. Before Noboru could respond, Takeshi entered the room, his expression revealing momentary assessment of their conversation before he addressed Noboru directly. Kojima-san seeks your input regarding potential departure plans, he informed the younger man. The snow has temporarily ceased, raising question of whether attempt should be made to leave tomorrow if conditions hold. The interruption, whether deliberately timed or coincidental, provided natural conclusion to conversation that had approached uncomfortable proximity to May's actual circumstances. Noboru bowed politely to both of them before departing to join the consultation Takeshi had referenced, leaving Mei and Takeshi briefly alone in the herb-scented workspace. "Your conversation appeared intensive," Takeshi observed once Noboru had left. The neutral statement, nonetheless, carrying implicit question regarding the nature of their exchange. "He asked about circumstances that brought me to the mountains," Mei replied directly. Knowing Takeshi's concern stemmed from protective interest rather than inappropriate suspicion, I provided explanation consistent with our agreed narrative. Takeshi nodded, visible tension easing from his posture. "Noboru-san demonstrates unusual interest in those around him for one of his position," he noted. "Though not, I think, from inappropriate motive or suspicion." "No," Mei agreed. "He seems genuinely curious about experiences beyond conventional expectations of his class, an unusual quality in one born to provincial samurai household. May some find wisdom through questioning established boundaries," Takeshi observed, something in his tone suggesting personal experience with such questioning. "Though doing so rarely leads to comfortable path." The philosophical assessment aligned with what Mei had gradually learned of Takeshi's own journey, one that had apparently required challenging conventional expectations of samurai loyalty when those expectations conflicted with deeper principles he valued. Before she could respond, however, Ichiro returned to the workroom, ending their brief private exchange. The following day brought temporary clearing of winter storms, creating potential opportunity for the visitors' departure. After careful assessment of conditions and consultation among all parties, decision was reached to attempt return journey while favorable weather held, with understanding that progress would be challenging given substantial snow accumulation along mountain paths. Preparation for departure dominated the outpost's activities, with provisions carefully allocated for journey that might extend longer than original trek if weather deteriorated again. Ichiro gathered medical supplies and personal possessions, making arrangements for transfer of ongoing treatments to Takeshi where possible, and leaving detailed instructions for handling potential ailments that might arise during his absence. As these preparations progressed, Mei found herself experiencing unexpected mixture of emotions regarding the imminent changes to their mountain sanctuary. Practical relief at reduction in demands on their limited resources mingled with genuine regret at Ichiro's departure. His calm wisdom and medical knowledge had contributed significantly to both physical well-being and emotional stability during the difficult winter months. Additionally, his absence would leave her and Takeshi as sole inhabitants of the outpost, altering dynamics that had previously been moderated by third presence. On the morning of departure, as final preparations were made amid strengthening sunlight that promised continued clear conditions, Ichiro sought private conversation with Mei, while Takeshi assisted the retainers with organizing their equipment for optimal travel through deep snow. "I've left detailed instructions with Takeshi regarding common winter ailments and treatments," he informed her. His tone, professionally composed, though underlying warmth, suggested personal concern rather than merely practical handover. "But your assistance will be essential in areas requiring dexterity he sometimes lacks after old sword injury to his right hand." This reference to physical limitation Takeshi had never directly acknowledged, but that Mei had occasionally observed during particularly precise tasks surprised her slightly. Both that Ichiro mentioned it openly and that he explicitly entrusted her with compensating for this vulnerability in his absence. "I'll ensure treatments continue properly," she assured him, accepting both practical responsibility and implicit trust this handover represented. Ichiro nodded, then continued with unexpected directness. "My departure alters more than medical arrangements," he observed. "Your position here shifts significantly with only Takeshi remaining. The statement acknowledged realities they had all recognized but not explicitly discussed, that conventional propriety would view lone woman and unrelated man sharing isolated dwelling with considerably different assessment than same arrangement with third party present, regardless of actual behavior or intentions involved. "We've discussed necessary adjustments," May replied, maintaining composed practicality that matched Ichiro's own approach. Circumstances sometimes require flexibility regarding conventional expectations. A slight smile touched Ichiro's lips, rare expression from man who typically maintained careful neutrality in both feature and manner. "Indeed," he agreed, "though I would note that Takeshi's concern for your reputation and comfort extends beyond mere practical consideration. His regard appears substantial." The observation, delivered with clinical precision but evident personal interest, caught May momentarily off guard. While she had recognized evolving connection between herself and Takeshi over their months of shared sanctuary, neither had explicitly acknowledged potential romantic dimension to their developing relationship, certainly not to third party, however trusted. "Our circumstances create natural bond," she replied carefully. "Shared challenges often generate closer connection than might develop in more conventional settings." "Certainly," Ichiro acknowledged, accepting her deflection without pressing further. "I merely wish to ensure you recognize potential complications and opportunities that might arise in my absence, so you might prepare for either as you deemed appropriate." The consideration behind this somewhat awkward warning touched May unexpectedly. Despite his reserved manner and sometimes clinical approach to human interaction, Ichiro had clearly developed genuine concern for both his companions' welfare during their shared winter sanctuary. "Thank you," she said simply, "for both the warning and the trust it represents." With final medical instructions transferred and personal considerations acknowledged, preparations for departure concluded amid strengthening daylight. The retainers assembled in the cleared area before the outpost, equipment distributed for optimal travel through challenging conditions, with Ichiro's medical supplies given priority position to protect delicate contents from potential damage during difficult passage. Formal farewells were exchanged with appropriate acknowledgement of hospitality received and assistance rendered. Kojima, as leader of the retainers, presented small but valuable gift of preserved specialty foods from his lord's province, gesture that recognized substantial imposition their presence had created, while avoiding implication of payment for medical services that might offend physicians' professional dignity. As the departure party moved away from the outpost, beginning their journey back toward provincial civilization beyond the mountains, May and Takeshi stood in the cleared area, watching until distance and forest edge obscured the travelers from view. The silence between them carried awareness of significant transition their sanctuary had just experienced, from temporary community of 3 unlikely companions to more intimate partnership that would shape their remaining winter isolation. "The outpost seems suddenly larger," Takeshi observed as they finally turned back toward the entrance. His casual tone belying the significant shift in their circumstances, his comment acknowledged. "And quieter," May agreed, matching his approach of recognizing change without immediately addressing its deeper implications. "Though I suspect we'll adjust quickly enough to restored space and privacy." Takeshi nodded, holding the door as they re-entered structure now emptied of its temporary inhabitants. Inside, evidence of the visitors' presence remained visible in rearranged furnishings and spaces cleared of normal occupants' possessions. Returning the outpost to its previous organization would provide immediate practical focus that might ease potential awkwardness of transition to their new arrangement. As they began this restoration process, working together with the easy coordination developed over months of shared tasks, May found herself appreciating Takeshi's approach to their altered circumstance. He neither dramatized the change with excessive acknowledgement of potential impropriety nor ignored it completely, instead maintaining practical focus that created space for gradual adjustment rather than immediate redefinition of their relationship. By evening, the outpost had largely returned to its pre-visitor arrangement, though Ichiro's absence remained evident in spaces now vacant of his possessions and presence. As they shared simple meal beside the hearth, conversation initially focused on practical matters, adjustments to daily routines that would be required with reduction to 2 inhabitants, redistribution of tasks Ichiro had previously managed, considerations regarding continued winter survival with slightly diminished medical support. Gradually, however, as practical concerns were addressed and familiar comfort of shared meal worked its gentle influence, conversation shifted toward more personal territory. "Do you think Ichiro will return?" May asked, genuine curiosity rather than anxiety motivating the question. His skills seemed highly valued by Lord Matsuda's household. Takeshi considered this thoughtfully before responding. "Perhaps not immediately," he acknowledged. "The medical situation described would likely require extended treatment, and I suspect his departure from the capital left certain matters unresolved that Lord Matsuda's connections might help address from safer distance." This assessment aligned with hints Ichiro had occasionally dropped regarding his reasons for seeking mountain sanctuary. Political complications connected to his medical practice among powerful households, rather than personal misconduct or criminal charge. If Lord Matsuda offered both professional opportunity and potential resolution of these complications, Ichiro's temporary departure might indeed extend indefinitely. "And you?" May asked, the question emerging before she had fully considered its implications. "Do you anticipate returning to your previous life eventually, or have circumstances permanently altered your path?" It was more direct inquiry into his personal history and intentions than she had previously ventured. Crossing boundaries of privacy they had generally maintained despite months of shared living. Something in their current circumstances, perhaps the intimacy created by reduction to just 2 inhabitants, perhaps gradual evolution of trust between them, made such questions seem appropriate, despite its potentially sensitive nature. Takeshi's expression revealed momentary surprise at her directness, followed by thoughtful consideration rather than defensive withdrawal. He set aside his empty bowl, gaze focused on flames dancing in the hearth as he formulated response. "My departure from Lord Abe's service resulted from specific action I could not honorably support," he said finally. He ordered execution of village headman, who had sheltered injured soldier from opposing faction during recent border dispute. The man had acted from simple human compassion, providing medical care without political consideration. His punishment was intended as message regarding consequences of failing to prioritize clan loyalty above all other values. The explanation, more detailed than any Takeshi had previously offered regarding his reasons for abandoning samurai service, revealed fundamental conflict between personal conscience and conventional expectations of absolute obedience. May remained silent, recognizing significance of this confidence and allowing him space to continue at his own pace. "I neither executed the order nor directly opposed it," Takeshi continued, regret evident in his tone despite controlled expression. "Instead, I removed myself from service before the execution was carried out, knowing my departure would create sufficient disruption that implementation might be delayed, providing opportunity for the headman to be warned and perhaps escape." "Did he?" May asked quietly. "I don't know," Takeshi admitted. My immediate departure prevented me from learning the outcome. I can only hope the confusion created sufficient opening for those who shared my concerns to take action I myself lacked courage to implement directly. The self-criticism implicit in this assessment struck May as unnecessarily harsh, given the constraints and consequences Takeshi had faced in his position. Choosing to abandon service and status rather than participate in injustice required considerable courage, she observed. Many would have simply followed orders despite personal misgivings, preserving position at cost of conscience. Takeshi acknowledged this perspective with slight inclination of his head, though his expression suggested he remained uncertain regarding the adequacy of his response to the situation. As for whether return to previous life remains possible, he continued, addressing her original question directly, much depends on developments during my absence. If Lord Abe recognized legitimacy of concerns that prompted my departure, reconciliation might be possible. If not, return would likely result in punishment for perceived disloyalty, regardless of underlying principle. The assessment was pragmatic rather than self-pitying, recognizing political realities that governed samurai service without either minimizing importance of the stand he had taken or exaggerating its likely impact on established power structures. May found herself appreciating both the moral clarity that had guided his decision and the practical understanding he maintained regarding its consequences. "And which outcome would you prefer?" she asked, genuine curiosity about his current perspective, motivating the question. Reconciliation and return to service or permanent separation from previous role? Takeshi's gaze shifted from the fire to meet hers directly, unexpected intensity in his expression as he considered her question. 6 months ago, I would have unhesitatingly preferred reconciliation, he said. My identity, training, and purpose were entirely defined by service to my lord and clan. The possibility of permanent separation represented failure of everything I had been taught to value. And now? May prompted gently when he paused. Now I find myself questioning whether the unquestioning loyalty expected of samurai service truly represents highest expression of the principles that underlie our training, he replied. Honor, courage, discipline, protection of those who cannot protect themselves. These values extend beyond specific loyalty to individual lord or clan. Perhaps they might find different but equally meaningful expression in life beyond traditional service. The philosophical reassessment revealed depth of reflection Takeshi had clearly engaged in during his months of sanctuary in the mountains, questioning not merely specific circumstances that had prompted his departure from service, but fundamental framework that had previously defined his identity and purpose. Such questioning represented significant evolution from traditional samurai perspective that placed loyalty to Lord above all other considerations. These mountains seemed to encourage such reconsideration of established paths, May observed, thinking of her own journey from accepted village expectations toward uncertain but potentially more authentic future. Perhaps distance from familiar surroundings allows clearer view of underlying truths normally obscured by daily patterns. Takeshi smiled slightly, appreciating this philosophical framing. Indeed, though such clarity sometimes raises more questions than it answers regarding practical path forward. This acknowledgement of ongoing uncertainty regarding future direction created natural opening for May to share something of her own journey and intentions. Reciprocal confidence that balanced their exchange rather than leaving Takeshi's revelations unmatched by comparable openness from her side. I carry letter, she said quietly. Decision to share this detail made in moment rather than calculated in advance. From merchant who previously employed me, addressed to associate in the capital. It offers potential position there, away from those who believe they have claim on me in my home province. D. The admission revealed more concrete plan than she had previously acknowledged regarding her intentions once winter released its grip on the mountains. Takeshi received this information with thoughtful nod, neither pressing for details she hadn't offered, nor dismissing significance of confidence she had chosen to share. The capital offers anonymity often impossible in provincial settings, he observed, though navigation of its complex social hierarchies presents challenges of its own. The position described involves textile workshop, May elaborated, continuing now that initial confidence had been offered. My experience with dyes and fabric preparation would prove useful, while location within larger household would provide protection difficult to maintain as solitary woman. This additional detail regarding her background and plans represented significant increase in trust, revealing specific skills and experience she had previously kept vague to maintain maximum anonymity. Takeshi appeared to recognize the significance of this sharing, his expression reflecting appreciation for confidence without pushing for further revelation. A well-considered arrangement, he acknowledged, though journey to the capital remains substantial undertaking, particularly for women traveling alone. The observation highlighted practical challenge May had been consciously avoiding detailed consideration of during winter months when travel remained impossible, regardless of planning. The letter offered potential sanctuary if she could reach its intended recipient, but the journey itself presented significant dangers, particularly given uncertain status of those who might still seek to reclaim her. I've considered various approaches, she said, though in truth her planning remained frustratingly incomplete regarding this crucial aspect of her intended escape. Joining merchant caravan as assistant or attaching myself to pilgrim group traveling to capital shrines seem most promising options for safer passage. Takeshi nodded thoughtfully. Both offer reasonable protection through association with legitimate travelers, he agreed, though timing becomes significant consideration, as such opportunities follow seasonal patterns that might not align with optimal departure from mountains. The practical assessment highlighted complications May had recognized but not fully resolved in her planning. That transition from mountain sanctuary to intended destination involved complex timing that balanced weather conditions, available travel companions, and continued risk from potential pursuers. Before she could respond, however, Takeshi offered unexpected alternative. I have contacts in provinces between here and the capital, he said, the statement presented as casual observation rather than dramatic revelation. Primarily, former military associates now established in various positions throughout the region. They might provide points of sanctuary along journey that would reduce need for continuous association with larger traveling group. The offer, for such it clearly was, despite indirect presentation, caught May by surprise. It suggested not only willingness to assist with her onward journey, but existence of network beyond isolated mountain outpost that might significantly improve her chances of reaching the capital safely. More importantly, it implied Takeshi's continued involvement in her situation extending beyond their current shared sanctuary, potentially accompanying her for at least portion of journey rather than simply providing directions or introductions. Such contacts would indeed prove valuable, she acknowledged, uncertain how directly to address the implicit offer his statement contained. Though utilizing them might potentially expose your own location to those who might report back to Lord Abe's household. The concern was genuine rather than merely deflection. Recognition that assistance extended to her might carry risk to Takeshi's own circumstances, particularly if his former lord remained displeased with his departure from service. His expression suggested he had already considered this complication and found it acceptable risk given the alternative of sending her to attempt dangerous journey without adequate support. "Some risks serve worthwhile purpose," he replied simply, "and certain contacts can be trusted with discretion regarding my movements and associations." The statement acknowledged potential danger without dismissing its significance, while affirming willingness to accept such risk in service of her safety. It represented commitment extending beyond mere practical assistance to something more personal, concern for her well-being that transcended casual association or temporary shared circumstance. This realization shifted something in May's perception of their relationship, not sudden transformation, but gradual recognition of depth that had developed between them during months of shared sanctuary. What had begun as pragmatic arrangement for mutual survival had evolved into connection based on genuine appreciation of each other's character, values, and company. Whether this connection might develop further remained uncertain, but its current reality deserved acknowledgement rather than continued pretense of merely practical association. "Thank you," she said quietly, simplicity of response masking complexity of emotions behind it. Not merely for practical assistance offered, but for understanding importance of this journey beyond its obvious elements. Takeshi inclined his head in acknowledgement of both expressed gratitude and deeper meaning it contained. "We each seek paths that honor internal truths rather than merely external expectations," he observed. Supporting such journeys seems appropriate recognition of shared understanding, regardless of differences in our specific circumstances. The philosophical framing provided dignified context for what might otherwise have seemed overly personal offer of assistance, allowing both to maintain appropriate boundaries while acknowledging genuine connection that had developed between them. This balance between personal and practical, between emotional truth and dignified restraint, characterized the evolution of their relationship throughout shared winter sanctuary. As night deepened around the outpost, conversation gradually shifted to more immediate considerations regarding adjustments to daily routines now required with Ichiro's departure. The practical focus provided natural transition from more personal exchange without diminishing significance of confidences shared or commitments implied. By the time they retired to their separate chambers, new understanding had been established regarding both present circumstances and future possibilities, though much remained unspoken pending developments that would only emerge when spring eventually released them from winter's isolation. The following weeks established new patterns as May and Takeshi adjusted to the outpost's altered population. Without Ichiro's presence, certain tasks required redistribution, creating both challenges and opportunities for their shared management of daily survival. May took primary responsibility for medicinal preparations, following detailed instructions the physician had left behind. Takeshi increased frequency of hunting expeditions as game gradually returned to lower elevations with winter's slow recession, ensuring adequate protein supplemented their preserved provisions. Their evenings developed more consistent rhythm of shared activities, preparing meals together, maintaining equipment, and engaging in conversations that gradually deepened as initial reserve regarding personal histories gave way to more complete exchange of experiences and perspectives. May shared more details of her upbringing in the Dyer's household, her development of skills that had eventually created opportunity for employment in merchants' establishment, and eventually, with careful editing of most sensitive elements, the circumstances that had forced her flight. The merchant's son had gambling debts, she explained during one such evening conversation. Significant enough to threaten family business if creditors pressed for immediate payment. His father arranged settlement that involved transferring certain assets to primary creditor. Takeshi recognizing the careful phrasing concealed unpleasant reality, nodded encouragement without pressing for explicit detail she seemed reluctant to provide. "And you were among those assets," he observed quietly. "Yes," May acknowledged, appreciating his understanding without requiring graphic elaboration. The arrangement was presented as marriage, but both nature of groom and circumstances of transfer made actual intention clear enough. When opportunity arose to leave before formal ceremony could be conducted, I chose flight rather than submission to arrangement I had no part in creating. The simple statement encompassed complicated reality, that she had effectively been sold to settle another's debts, with expectation she would serve however her new owner demanded, regardless of personal preference or consent. Such arrangements, while not officially sanctioned, occurred with sufficient frequency in provincial settings that little protection existed for women placed in such circumstances. "A courageous decision," Takeshi noted, genuine admiration evident in his tone. Many would have accepted even such unjust arrangement rather than risk dangers of solitary flight. "Perhaps not courage so much as desperation," May replied, though she appreciated his perspective. The creditor's reputation regarding previous women who had come under his protection left little doubt about what awaited. Death in Forest seemed preferable alternative to what such arrangement would entail. Undated, the stark assessment reflected clear-eyed evaluation of options that had faced her in moment of decision. Not romantic adventure or assertion of independence, but desperate choice between different forms of potential destruction. That she had survived initial flight and eventually found temporary sanctuary represented combination of preparation, determination, and simple fortune that might easily have concluded differently. "And the letter you carry?" Takeshi asked, connecting her current situation to previously mentioned hope for future sanctuary. "How did such potential lifeline come into your possession?" "The merchant's wife," May explained. "She had been kind to me during my service in their household, recognizing perhaps something of her own circumstances in mine. When she realized her husband's intentions regarding settlement of their son's debts, she provided both warning of imminent transfer and letter addressed to her brother in capital, textile merchant who had occasionally visited their household during my employment there. Otem." This additional context explained both how May had managed to flee before arrangement could be completed and source of potential sanctuary she now sought in capital. The merchant's wife had provided practical assistance at considerable personal risk, offering possibility of escape rather than merely sympathy for May's unfortunate circumstances. "She showed remarkable courage herself," Takeshi observed. "Opposing her husband's arrangements, even indirectly, would carry significant risk to her own position." "Yes," May agreed, remembering the woman's tense features as she had pressed letter into her hands with whispered instructions for finding her brother's establishment in the capital. She had few opportunities to directly challenge household decisions, but found ways to exercise what limited agency circumstances permitted. Her example taught me much about finding pathways within seemingly immovable constraints. This philosophical assessment revealed depth of May's understanding regarding how power operated within hierarchical structures, recognition that even those with apparently limited options might identify and utilize small openings that existing systems failed to completely close. Such understanding likely contributed significantly to her survival during difficult flight and subsequent adaptation to challenging circumstances. Takeshi nodded thoughtfully. "Such wisdom often emerges from precisely those positions conventional power structures seek to most thoroughly control," he observed. "Perhaps because necessity creates perspective impossible to develop when privilege shields one from full awareness of systems operation." The observation suggested surprisingly nuanced understanding of power dynamics for one born into samurai class, where hierarchical authority and unquestioning obedience formed core principles of traditional training. Combined with his earlier explanation regarding departure from Lord Abe's service, it revealed philosophical evolution that had clearly been developing long before their paths crossed in these mountains. As winter slowly loosened its grip on the mountains, their conversations increasingly included practical planning for eventual departure when weather and conditions permitted travel toward lower elevations. The letter May carried remained primary focus of her intentions, reaching the capital and textile merchant who might provide both employment and protection from those still potentially seeking to reclaim her. Takeshi's offered network of contacts between mountains and capital provided significantly improved framework for this journey, reducing risks of traveling entirely alone while avoiding more public associations that might draw unwanted attention. The most direct route passes through Suwano province. Takeshi noted one evening as they reviewed crude map he had sketched of territories between their current location and intended destination, where Lord Matsuda, who summoned Ichiro, maintains his household. We might find temporary sanctuary there if needed, given connection established through our physician's service. Or, the practical suggestion highlighted advantage created by unexpected visitors who had disrupted their winter isolation. What had initially appeared potential threat to their sanctuary had instead generated additional resource for eventual journey, expansion of network that might provide assistance along challenging path toward May's hoped-for new beginning. And beyond Suwano? She asked, studying the mapped route with careful attention to distances and terrain features. Former military companion maintains way station along Primary Road, Takeshi replied. Man of few words, but absolute reliability. He would provide safe accommodation for night or two without questions regarding our circumstances or destination. This pattern of potential sanctuary points continued across mapped route. Former associates, distant connections, and occasionally commercial establishments where Takeshi's status as samurai, however currently masterless, would ensure appropriate accommodation without excessive curiosity about traveling companions. The network wasn't seamless. Certain stretches would require independent travel without established safety points, but represented significant improvement over May's original expectation of making entire journey without assistance or protection. As these preparations progressed, certain questions remained deliberately unaddressed between them. Whether Takeshi intended merely to ensure her safe passage to the capital before returning to mountains or other destination, or whether his own path might continue alongside hers beyond delivery of letter to intended recipient. Neither raised this matter directly, perhaps recognizing that multiple uncertainties made definitive answer premature, perhaps hesitant to disrupt current comfortable partnership with speculation about future arrangements neither could fully control. The unspoken question created subtle tension beneath otherwise practical planning. Not active discord, but awareness of significant decision point that would eventually require explicit address. May found herself increasingly conscious of what Takeshi's continued presence in her life had come to mean during their shared sanctuary. Not merely practical protection and assistance, but companionship that engaged both intellect and heart in ways she had not previously experienced with any man. The possibility of continuing this connection beyond immediate journey both attracted and concerned her, given complicated circumstances that had shaped both their current situations. Spring's arrival in the mountains came gradually rather than suddenly, steady warming that slowly melted accumulated snow, revealing ground that had lain hidden for months beneath white blanket. The outpost's immediate surroundings transformed as meltwater created temporary streams across previously frozen landscape. Early shoots emerged from softening soil, and birdsong returned to forest that had maintained winter silence during coldest months. With these seasonal changes came increased activity preparing for eventual departure. Preserved provisions were assessed and organized for travel, equipment checked for winter damage and repaired as needed, and clothing adjusted for conditions that would likely vary significantly between mountain elevations and lower provinces they would traverse. Throughout these practical preparations, May found herself experiencing complex emotions regarding imminent departure from sanctuary that had sheltered her through most difficult winter of her life. One evening, as they shared simple meal beside hearth that no longer required constant feeding to maintain survivable temperatures, Takeshi finally addressed matter that had remained unspoken through weeks of preparation. "The southern path should be passable within week," he observed, reference to primary route that would eventually lead toward provincial towns beyond mountains. Weather patterns suggest stable conditions, and meltwater flooding along lower sections should have receded by then if current drainage continues. May nodded, accepting this assessment of imminent departure window. "The route you've outlined seems well considered," she acknowledged, with contact points providing reasonable security between longer stretches of independent travel. Takeshi set aside his empty bowl, expression suggesting transition to more significant topic than merely practical travel arrangements. "I've been considering optimal approach once we reach the capital," he said, the "we" carrying implicit confirmation of intention to accompany her throughout journey rather than merely portion of route. Directly approaching textile merchant with letter might create unnecessary exposure if household is being watched by those still seeking you. The observation highlighted practical concern May had considered, but not fully resolved in her planning. If those seeking to reclaim her had connections in the capital, approaching intended sanctuary directly might create vulnerability at precisely moment when safety seemed finally within reach. "What alternative would you suggest?" she asked, appreciating both practical insight and implicit commitment his continued involvement represented. "Initial contact through intermediate party," Takeshi proposed. "I have acquaintance from military service who now serves minor official in Capital District where textile merchant's establishment is located. He could deliver letter and secure private meeting away from household itself, reducing risk of observation or interception." The suggestion demonstrated both practical strategy and specific knowledge of Capital's complex social and geographic landscape. Resources May would have lacked if attempting journey alone. It represented significant advantage created by Takeshi's involvement in her situation beyond mere physical protection journey might require. "That seems wise precaution," she agreed. "Though it requires extending trust to additional party neither of us has seen in considerable time." "True," Takeshi acknowledged, "though this particular acquaintance has proven trustworthy in circumstances considerably more challenging than discreet message delivery, and his current position depends on reputation for absolute discretion regarding matters passing through his hands." This additional context provided reassurance regarding proposed approach, suggesting Takeshi had carefully considered reliability of suggested intermediary rather than merely offering convenient connection without adequate assessment of potential risks involved. It reflected the methodical, thorough approach he brought to all significant decisions, quality May had come to deeply appreciate during their shared months in Mountain Sanctuary. With this practical matter addressed, conversation might naturally have returned to immediate preparations for departure. Instead, Takeshi continued with unexpected directness that suggested decision to address more personal dimension of their situation. "Beyond practical arrangements," he said, gaze steady but expression revealing unusual vulnerability. "I find myself considering what might follow successful delivery of letter and establishment of your position within Textile Merchant's household." Nah. The statement acknowledged unspoken question that had hovered between them throughout planning process, whether their paths would continue together beyond immediate journey, or diverge once May's intended sanctuary had been secured. By raising matter directly, Takeshi created opening for honest discussion of possibilities neither had explicitly explored despite deepening connection between them. May felt momentary tension at this shift toward territory both had carefully navigated around during previous conversations. Yet she recognized importance of addressing future possibilities before journey placed them in circumstances where practical pressures might force decisions without adequate reflection or consideration. "I've been considering similar question," she admitted quietly. "Though future beyond immediate goal remains difficult to envision clearly given uncertainties surrounding both our situations." "Indeed," Takeshi agreed. "Yet I find myself reluctant to leave such significant matter entirely to circumstance, without at least acknowledging possibilities that might exist should conditions prove favorable." The carefully phrased statement suggested desire for some framework regarding potential continued association, without demanding commitment that neither could responsibly make given current uncertainties. May appreciated both the sentiment behind this approach and the respectful manner in which it was expressed, acknowledging developing connection between them without pressuring for declarations that would be premature given their complicated circumstances. "What possibilities do you envision?" she asked, genuine curiosity rather than evasion motivating the question. Understanding Takeshi's perspective seemed essential foundation for meaningful response to implicit invitation his statement contained. He considered this thoughtfully before responding. Characteristic care in choosing words, reflecting significance he attached to this conversation. "I find myself valuing connection that has developed between us during these months of shared sanctuary," he said finally. "Not merely practical partnership in survival, but deeper appreciation of each other's perspectives, experiences, and essential nature. Such connection seems worth preserving if circumstances permit, though specific form that preservation might take remains necessarily undefined given current uncertainties." The statement acknowledged emotional truth of their relationship while recognizing practical constraints that limited immediate commitment to particular arrangement or future. It offered honest expression of appreciation and desire for continued association without presuming specific expectations that might prove unworkable given complex circumstances both still navigated. May found herself deeply touched by a combination of emotional honesty and practical restraint this approach represented. Reflection of fundamental integrity that had consistently characterized Takeshi's interactions with her, despite differences in their social positions and backgrounds. It deserved equally thoughtful response that acknowledged both developing feelings between them and realistic assessment of challenges their respective situations presented. "I share that valuation," she replied after moments' reflection. "These months have created connection I neither anticipated nor sought, yet now find myself unwilling to simply abandon once immediate necessity of shared sanctuary concludes." She hesitated briefly before continuing with matching honesty. "Yet our paths forward carry complications neither can fully resolve through simply wishing them absent." Takeshi nodded, appreciating both the reciprocal acknowledgement of connection and realistic recognition of constraints their circumstances imposed. "Perhaps then, We might agree to maintain association through journey to capital and initial establishment of your position there, then reassess possibilities once immediate uncertainties have found some resolution. Nay, this proposal offered practical framework for immediate future, while leaving longer-term possibilities open to development based on how various uncertainties resolved themselves. It represented neither premature commitment nor artificial limitation on potential relationship. Instead, creating space for continued exploration of connection that had developed between them without ignoring real-world complications both still faced. That seems both wise and honest approach, May agreed, relief and appreciation evident in her tone. Allowing genuine connection to guide our choices while maintaining awareness of practical realities that influence what forms those choices might ultimately take. With this understanding established between them, neither formal commitment nor casual dismissal of developing relationship, but rather thoughtful acknowledgement of both emotional truth and practical circumstance, conversation gradually returned to more immediate concerns regarding departure preparations. Yet subtle shift had occurred in atmosphere between them, with unspoken question finally addressed and framework established for navigating complex path forward together, at least through initial journey toward uncertain future beyond Mountain Sanctuary that had both protected and transformed them during shared winter isolation. When departure day finally arrived, early spring sunshine illuminating landscape, now largely free of snow, though still bearing winter's lingering chill in shaded areas, May found herself experiencing complicated mixture of emotions regarding Sanctuary they prepared to leave behind. The abandoned cabin where Takeshi had first discovered her seemed lifetime ago rather than merely months, her desperate flight from unwanted claiming having led to unexpected sanctuary that had provided not merely physical survival, but emotional and spiritual renewal she could never have anticipated when she fled into autumn night. As they secured outpost against their absence, possibility remained they might need to return if journey proved more complicated than anticipated. May took moment to stand in cleared area before structure, absorbing familiar surroundings one final time before departure. Takeshi joined her there, pack already secured across his shoulders, twin swords at his hip representing return to more formal presentation than he had maintained during private sanctuary of winter months. "The mountains change us," he observed quietly, following her gaze across landscape that had sheltered them through harshest season. "Whether we seek such transformation or merely survival when we enter their domain." "Yes," May agreed, recognizing truth in philosophical observation. "I came seeking merely escape, yet found something considerably more significant in sanctuary these heights provided." They stood together a moment longer, acknowledging transition this departure represented. Not merely physical journey toward new destination, but movement from one phase of life into another, carrying lessons and connections Mountain Sanctuary had forged between them. Then, with shared nod that required no further words between them, they turned toward path leading downward and began journey that would eventually carry them beyond isolated sanctuary into uncertain but potentially meaningful future. Neither could have anticipated when autumn rain first drove desperate woman to seek shelter in abandoned cabin, before Samurai's unexpected knock transformed her solitary flight into shared journey toward possibility rather than merely away from danger. The mountain's final gift, perhaps, was not merely temporary sanctuary, but lasting connection between two unlikely travelers, brought together by circumstances neither had sought but both had ultimately embraced, transforming claimed cabin into found home, however temporary, and isolation into partnership that might sustain them through whatever challenges awaited beyond winter's protective embrace.